Hey, good to see you. Welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast. Danny Pommells along with Noah Levick. Our guy, Steve Graham. Graham is producing the show today. Of course, you will not hear from him, but that just means a lot to me because Graham is one of my favorite people at the office, along with Noah Levick, our esteemed NBC Sports Philadelphia .com writer. Easy for me to say. Ben Barry on vacation. Noah, how you feeling, man? We're in the holiday season and New Year is approaching. You got some resolutions you're working on?
Still got work to do there, but I do always like putting together the resolutions. So,
you're a resolutions guy. Okay.
I do. Yeah. I guess it's a little corny, but it works for me in general. So I got some work to do there over the next few days, but doing well overall. Steve Graham would also be extremely high in my office power rankings. So we're helping us out today.
Now, before we get to the basketball, let's just wrap up the resolution thing. Do you reflect back on the resolutions from the previous year, or?
Yeah, I don't formally do it as, okay, it's December 31st. How do I do?
Right.
But I don't know. Usually there's like a point in the year where my mind floats to how am I doing on those resolutions? And sometimes if I can't remember them exactly, I'll pull them back up. So last year was a good one. So I have a high bar to meet, but hopefully I'll be able to pull it off. We'll see.
I'm going to get a look at Noah Levick's vision board for everyone there watching and listening, and I'm going to report back on what it looks like exactly. I imagine it's pretty detailed, but what is detailed is the way these Sixers are stringing some wins together. We were a 2-point loss to the Hawks away from a 4-game winning streak, Noah. And we will get to maybe what that Hawks loss and last night's them letting the Raptors back into the game where they had as much as a 26-point lead, what that precipitated after the game in an exchange with Doc Rivers and Keith Pompey. We will get to that in a bit because I want to get your opinion on that. But Noah, I was surprised on Christmas with tickets from my wife to the Washington Sixers game. So I went down to Capital One Arena, took in the action. They actually won. I had an Eagles hat on. People were giving me guff about my Philly gear. It's been a while since I've gotten, some pushback from people about my Philadelphia fandom. So that was enjoyable, to feel that a little bit, kind of give it back to them and get it. But the Sixers, which my mom said, congratulations, Dan. I said, for what? She said, you went down there and they actually won. And I was like, you know what? I can't take that for granted because given the climate and the circumstances, anything could have happened, and it almost did. But the Sixers obviously held off the Wizards, and as they did last night against the Raptors. We have to talk about the performances of Joel Embiid and, Daniel Gafford and Montrezl Harrell and, Chris Boucher and whoever else they wanted to throw at Joel Embiid are not as formidable as this MVP runner-up. But he had his way with those matchups as he should. 72 points in the last 2 games. You got to mention this Allen Iverson, Wilt Chamberlain stat with Joel, the first Sixer to have 30 or more in 6 or more games since Iverson, I believe in 2006. And Wilt Chamberlain will be the only other person to do that in the Sixers uniform. So are we being treated to a special performance along with the fact that it's a bit of the circumstances of the matchups, Noah, or are we just witnessing just an incredible Joel Embiid stretch here?
I think the matchups are not irrelevant, but I'd lead toward the former overall. I think really since he's come back from COVID-19, with the exception of those couple of games where his jump shot was quite wayward, he's been excellent. And for me, what stood out and what I was curious to see heading into the Raptors game is his passing. And I thought he, again, passed the ball exceptionally well against Toronto. I think he had 4 assists, 2 turnovers, but a lot of those hockey assists in Canada. And I think you just see this variety he has as a passer keeps expanding. Like there's a play last night when he grabs a rebound, just takes it up the floor himself and makes this nifty one-handed pass to Seth Curry for a corner three. So I think Joel Embiid in that area seems to have made really legitimate and encouraging development through the first 32 or so games of this season. And yeah, I think the scoring numbers, you'd expect those to be elevated, given Toronto's primary center last night is Chris Boucher, who was a rather skinny 6'9". Given that Washington doesn't generally defend Joel Embiid very well, and had Montrezl Harrell, who's another undersized guy guarding him for much of that game. But I think if you look at the full spectrum of Embiid's game and you don't just focus on the scoring, there's also a lot to like. So yeah, credit to him for playing at a very high level in ways just besides the points, I think.
Yeah, and we saw in the Wizards game him also, we had talked about this in previous podcasts, but there have been times when Joel Embiid has played both of these roles. I think he is best suited not having to play both of these roles. And the role that I'm talking about is being the primary scorer and marquee player, as well as the tough guy in a sense, because, he's getting into these, he leads the league in post-up volume, as you mentioned in one of your articles on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. He's also down there banging with the big guys, and him and Montrezl Harrell get into it, which leads to Joel getting the technical. Eventually, Harrell got ejected because of another interaction, and you get comments from Montrezl Harrell after the game saying Joel needs to stand on his toughness more, which, you can take either here or there, but I just don't. I wish there wasn't the duality. I wish he didn't have to do both of those. Obviously, he's leading the team in reboundings and scoring. His assists are way up, and the defense overall with blocks and whatnot. And I just feel like they need a lot of things, but I just wish he didn't have to play both of those roles, and particularly that was noticeable, exacerbated with him and Montrezl Harrell getting into it in the Wizards game. And, not that the Raptors had, so many players out with protocols and whatnot, so they couldn't afford to be physical in that way or to rile Joel up in that way. So we didn't see it as much there, but I just wish that didn't have to be that way. Do you notice that sometimes, him having to play those roles?
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely agree with you, just in that I think if a player is so multi-talented and can hurt opponents in so many different ways, like you might as well capitalize on that. And Joel Embiid, to be clear, is an anomaly with how much he posts up and how efficiently he does it. Like you look at this year, I believe he's posting up around 8.5 times a game, and the next closest players are around 4.5, 5 times. And that is viable because Embiid, yet again, does so efficiently. And this year isn't even turning the ball over very much from the post, which might have been problematic in previous years. I do think as far as there being too much on his plate, I feel that to be true just in the broad sense of, yet again, last night, he's kind of saving them from he is saving them from what would have been a bad loss in that game. And far from the first time he's had to do that this season. Those 36 points, again, very efficient ones, only took 16 shots to do it. And undeniably, regardless of the competition, he's by far the team's best player. And he's quite obviously the reason they managed to win that game, despite allowing Chris Boucher to go on this 3-point shooting spree in the second half and allowing an undermanned Raptors team to put a scare in them. So I think having such a burden on Embiid in that broad way is not ideal and doesn't reflect too well on the team as a whole. But as far as the ways they're using him, why not? And this is the era of the unicorn, apparently, right? And
Right.
Joel Embiid, I guess, is his own sort of unicorn. He's even bigger than the point forwards that are in vogue nowadays. He's a center who can do a little bit of everything. It's increasingly seeming like.
Yeah, and we've talked so much about the Sixers needing help and supporting Joel and getting the most out of him in his prime. We'll continue with the good vibes here, and shout out to George Niang, shout out to the bench, that second unit really coming through when the starters just did not have it, from Seth Curry to Tobias Harris to Tyrese Maxey, and a really interesting exchange between Joel and Tyrese after the game. But Joel was just like, bro, like, you were trash tonight. And Tyrese and him just really laughed it off. And it was just so cool to see that interaction between them. But as bad as those guys were, George Niang just came in bombing away. And it's just great to see him. Obviously, his second game back from, maybe not obviously, but his second game back from being on the COVID list. He comes back again against Washington, gets his legs under him, and then they take a trip to Toronto for the penultimate game of this 3-game road trip. And he just really looks like the Niang that they wanted to acquire. So shout out to the second unit. No, I mean, really coming through when the Sixers needed it.
Right. And maybe it's too early to declare it. Maybe it's not, but seems like Furkan Korkmaz is over the slump that lasted 20 games or so. That began in Washington when all of a sudden he was shooting the ball with that limitless confidence again, and he put up double figure points for a second straight night. And Niang, as we've said a few times, I think is sneakily valuable. Obviously, it's most apparent when he's making 3-point shots, and like Korkmaz, that's the meat and potatoes of his game on most occasions. But yeah, I think just the way he plays basketball makes the team better, in that he's sensible with the decision making and takes pride in his defense and likes moving the ball, and just does a lot of things that, when he's on a good team, it enhances that team a little bit. So yeah, I think for the Sixers, nice to have him back. And yeah, they've got 3 more guys still in these health and safety protocols, and they'll hope to have that trio back soon as well.
With the good comes the bad. We talked about how well Joel played and the second unit. Outside of that, there's a lot of rough shooting nights for the Sixers. We mentioned Joel ribbon Tyrese Maxey. He was 2 for 11. 3 for 8 was Seth Curry. Matisse Thybulle, 3 for 7. But Tobias Harris with the sneaky triple-double on a 3 of 12 shooting night, but we see him once again shooting 14 free throws. I think it's the second game in 3 games where he's gotten double-digit attempts from the line. Are you making that out to be an anomaly? And what did you make of Tyrese, kind of backdooring this triple-double?
Well, just the fact that in game 705, this was his first career triple-double is remarkable, and that he's not a terrible passer. He's a pretty good rebounder. He's a pretty good scorer. You feel it would have happened once. As we've mentioned before, I think over the last couple of years, he's made strides as a passer. So sure, he wasn't quite as good with the assist numbers perhaps earlier in his career, but hey, good for him checking off that milestone. Yeah, and this was the Sixers' first triple-double this season. Steve Graham notes for us, which is, of course, not a shocker with no Ben Simmons, but still notable there. I think the free throws most definitely are encouraging, but fair to have a healthy dose of skepticism there that Harris will be able to sustain that, just given his track record and given how much he tends to like the post-up back down game and the mid-range shooting and that sort of thing. But I think anytime he can capitalize on a situation where it's okay, I have a matchup that's advantageous because I have superior athleticism or because I have superior size, that's great. And that feels, I think, pretty natural to him. So last night, used some of the size and the strength, in the interior and made a concerted effort to draw free throws. So Sixers would love to see more of it, but I'm not so sure that he will sustain this pace, but we shall see.
And, we have heard him say that even since having COVID, he still feels like he has a cold every day. You have mentioned how, he's a player who benefits from the rhythm and flow of the offense, of being able to play on a frequent basis to get that rhythm and flow. And just seeing him at the press conference last night, and he's always such a clean cut, well-groomed guy. He just looked a little beat up, a little haggard, a little worn down, particularly after a night where he doesn't, shoot the ball well. And once again, traveling from Washington to Toronto to Brooklyn, it's not easy, being on this road trip and, responding, particularly after having been in the COVID protocol. But I'm really interested to see what happens in this game against Brooklyn on Thursday and what kind of Sixers team shows up, because it will be a test against the best team in the Eastern Conference. But it's worth noting that only a few wins separate the Sixers. I believe 5. I think the Sixers are 18-16 and the Nets are 23-9. So it's just 5 wins separating the Sixers, who are in 6th place, from the Nets, who are in 1st. So there's definitely ground that can be made up and opportunity here. We're approaching and creeping up slowly on this halfway point of the season. So it's difficult that the Sixers are still having these identity issues, and just like so many teams, having to deal with replacement players and people coming in and out of the protocol, and they're missing these key rotation guys and Andre Drummond and Shake Milton. But you have to be a bit optimistic with the way they've dealt with all of these issues. And having Joel Embiid helps, but they didn't have Joel for a while, and they were still able to continue to stay in the hunt and hopefully this is the start of them making a push toward stringing together some wins and putting hopefully a season together that they can be proud of when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's up to the individual whether they feel optimism is warranted here. I'm not sure personally that I would feel the same way, but I think Joel Embiid's on the roster and he's playing great basketball, so that is at least a positive that is undeniable. I think we're in a bizarre season here, and a lot of the normal lenses we might see things through probably have to go out the window.
Right.
And sure, the Sixers have been undermanned in a lot of these games, but the reality is every single game these days, both teams are missing a lot of key players, and the records still count. I guess the bottom line is they're 2 games above 500, and like you said, aren't that far off from the top of the Eastern Conference. I would be surprised if they again made a push for the number 1 seed or something along those lines. But the fact that they're now above those play-in places is certainly nice for the team, and I think it's possible that they're able to bump up in these standings a little bit if that they have some good fortune with COVID-19 and continue to be in advantageous spots here where they're playing opponents that are less fortunate. So I think that's what a lot of it boils down to in the 2021-22 season, which is it's not what we like to see, but a lot of it is very survival of the most healthiest team, the healthiest team. So the Sixers haven't been healthy a lot of the time, and they'll hope that changes soon.
Let's wrap up the first part of the podcast with the experiment as a starter that is Matisse Thybulle. I think we've seen enough of him in that role to have strong opinions about whether that is working for the Sixers, or maybe he's better suited coming off the bench, or matchup based starts. Defensively, there's really, no argument that can be made about his impact on that end. But there are two ends of the floor, and a couple of opportunities Matisse had that didn't quite go his way. A couple of drives, 3-point attempts. He did hit a 3-pointer. It was a timely one, and the Sixers needed it at that moment. I feel like he's better suited coming off the bench, and it really, there's the saying that it's not, who starts the game, but who finishes it, and I think that holds extremely true, and particularly with Matisse when his best traits are on the defensive end, and if he can bring that lockdown capability, every time he's on the floor and he's starting to get more benefit of the doubt from the refs, then the Sixers will benefit from that. Yes, he needs to improve the offensive game, and it's not coming along as quickly as people might have hoped, but I do still see a light at the end of the tunnel in that regard. But I think he's best suited probably, just filling in as the team, Doc Rivers obviously doing that right now, but filling in as the team needs. He's probably better suited coming off the bench, being with that second unit, and going out and being that, disruptor on the floor when the Sixers need it, and just filling a role as opposed to needing to start. Obviously, it's a necessity here, but I feel like Matisse as a starter isn't quite what people might want it to be.
It's tough having him in lineups with Joel Embiid because, and it's not just in a hypothetical sense, opponents double team off of him and they don't show him very much respect. I mean, one of the plays from this season, honestly, that stands out to me is in the Miami game when this was a zone game for the Heat. They just left him so open, and one of the shots he took, the body language was like, I'm so open, I guess I've got to shoot this, but it was not someone who was especially eager to shoot the ball, and Miami, just the way they played him, was very disrespectful, and he didn't make the Heat defense pay for that. So I think kind of in an ironic sense, there's the small silver lining of when he starts, he's typically the guy in the dunker spot. So at least that's not a 6'2" player in Tyrese Maxey. At least things can kind of be a little more conventional with the off-ball spacing around Embiid. But the numbers there haven't been great, and it makes sense that life becomes a little tougher for Embiid when you have Thybulle on the floor. The numbers when Thybulle and Green, share the floor have been very good, and I think that makes some sense. You kind of get a little of the best of both worlds with outside shooting and spacing on the floor in Green and Thybulle's defense. So I personally would like to see Doc Rivers use that pair a little more. I'd be curious if that is again sustainable over a larger sample size. It was good last season, I believe.
So would I guess it doesn't matter who plays the shooting guard, but I guess that would be Danny Green and Thybulle would be the 3.
Yeah, I imagine it would be matchup based. It would be
Right.
Matisse Thybulle's guarding, whoever's the best perimeter threat on the other team. But yeah, I believe last season with the Thybulle Green minutes per cleaning the glass were about a +15 net rating for the Sixers, which is excellent. And it wasn't a huge sample size, but it wasn't a tiny one. This year it is a rather small one, so maybe we see that grow a little bit. I'm not so sure whether we ever see Doc Rivers experiment with that group as a starting lineup, but I'm at the point now where it actually wouldn't surprise me that much, given he made this pregame comment a few games back that he really likes Seth Curry as a point guard. And then an hour and 45 minutes later, this is in Tyrese Maxey's first game back, he brings Maxey off the bench and starts Curry at point guard. I personally, don't love the idea of Maxey's minutes being less because you want Curry to play point guard. But I don't know. Maybe Rivers can find a way to juggle things such that Maxey does come off the bench in certain situations, and the starting lineup includes Curry at point guard, includes Green and Thybulle as your wings. It'd be at least intriguing to see, and there'd at least be some logic behind it in wanting to maximize Maxey's scoring in Embiid-less lineups, and also wanting the Thybulle-Green duo to play together. But yeah, Thybulle as a whole, I agree with you. The offensive development is probably not what some people would have hoped. And the Sixers will hope the shooting comes around a little bit. But right now that does not appear to be a reliable part of his game the same way that the elite defense is.
Our producer, Steve Graham, really summing up the yin and the yang of Matisse Thybulle here with the fact that as of December 21st, he is number 3 on NBA.com's Defensive Player of the Year rankings, the ladder there. But in the past 8 games where he started 7 of them, 5 points per game, 31.8 from 3-point range, 1.4 steals a game, 1.1 blocks a game. So you're getting all the defense that you would love, but just not as much of just a little, drop in the bucket offensively. So, but it just goes to show that the Sixers have a lot of strengths, but just like many teams have weaknesses that need to be addressed, and hopefully that will be addressed somewhat in the coming weeks. Worth noting, February 10th is the NBA trade deadline. Let's take a time out here. We'll get into what was, quote, a dumbass question, according to Doc Rivers, after this timeout.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilmU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
There's so much to explore in Valley Forge in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Montgomery County is composed of charming towns and main streets, and each with its own personality, style, and unique vibe. Whether you are looking to get away with family or enjoy a special trip with friends, leave behind the stress of planning and use our guide to find some of the most amazing things to do. Explore which town and main street suit you best. Visit makeitmainstreet.com to plan your getaway today.
So let's just preface this next topic, Noah, by saying that the Sixers should not have lost against the Atlanta Hawks. They had at least half a dozen guys in the COVID protocol. They ended up getting blown out by the Knicks with that pretty much same roster a few nights later. And the Sixers lose to them by 2 at home in a game that they should have won. It was a letdown. The Sixers underperformed. They have shown the propensity to underperform or play down to the level of their competition in games in the past. Am I saying anything that is inaccurate there?
Not at all.
Okay. With that in mind, they are playing a Raptors team that is decimated. Yes, the Sixers have a few guys out as well, rotation guys, valuable guys, Danny Green, Shake Milton, Andre Drummond, that weren't available for them against the Raptors. They did also build a 26-point lead against the Raptors. You saw the same Sixers team blow out a Wizards team that was dealing with COVID issues. Yes, the Sixers had players out as well. But with all that in mind, you go into the Raptors game afterward. Keith Pompey, to paraphrase, asked Doc Rivers about them essentially playing down to their competition and the fact that they didn't quite, nip it in the bud early and wrap it up in a nice, sweet bow against this Raptors team that was decimated and playing with replacement players. And the Sixers, almost lost the game. Doc Rivers took extreme exception to that. I was not, on the post-game press conference call or the Zoom. I know you were, Noah, so I'm going to assume that it was a little tense there with Keith and Doc going back and forth because Doc eventually labeled Keith's question as like a dumbass question, because he's like, well, when we won, those close games or lost the close games, that there wasn't the, opposite sentiment that, you guys are decimated and you squeaked this one out, or you only lost by a few points. Is there a moral victory there, or what have you? So can you give us an idea of like what it was like listening to that back and forth between those two, and wondering where it was going next?
Yeah, so the Sixers these days, it's just an in-person access thing. So
okay, so no Zoom.
Yeah,
okay,
only the folks on the road, and credit to Keith and the Inquirer. He's a dedicated reporter who travels with the team regularly, and as I guess folks saw in postgame live last night, is not afraid to ask tough questions. So credit to Keith Pompey for that. Yeah, the exchange, I can see kind of both sides of it. I can understand there being some frustration on Doc Rivers' end, in part because Danny Green, Shake Milton, and Andre Drummond, one might bristle at the assumption that that's insignificant, those absences, and that the Raptors were the only team missing key guys. But I think if you just look at it objectively, yes, the Raptors were missing more important players. They had no Scotty Barnes. They had no Fred VanVleet. They had no OG Anunoby. They had 5 guys out in health and safety protocols. And it was correct that the Sixers were favored to win that game. Now, the notion of should Rivers be concerned that the Sixers keep having these sorts of games or where they're squeaking by or even losing to undermanned teams, I think it is a fair question. I also think it's one where it makes sense for the coach to say, no, why would I be concerned about this? It's a weird season and we were missing key guys too, and all of that. So essentially I can understand both sides of it. I think as a reporter, you don't love the term about the coach calling it a dumb question, but these things can be emotional, and perhaps that's part of it, where Rivers just feels that this is insulting to his players or his team in some way. Mm-hmm. Even though, again, you maybe don't love the way as a reporter that he went about that particular exchange. And something I try to remind myself too when the question of emotion kind of comes to my mind is, look, the players and coaches, there's a cool down period. They're given 15 minutes. So ideally that's not factoring into it. But on the other hand, basketball is an emotional sport. As Rivers kind of brought up, as someone who played the game, to him, it's all about wins and losses. The margin of victory doesn't matter that much. So all this is to say, I think it's a nuanced topic. I think as a reporter who covers the team, on the beat, you don't really want to become the story. Sure. And I'm not sure it was fair for Keith Pompey to kind of be made a large part of the story there by Doc Rivers because he asked that question. But I also understand the frustration on Doc Rivers' end.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword where I feel like the question was valid. Doc's reaction was also valid. I feel like it was a bit emotional and misplaced because Doc in the past has criticized the Sixers in games that they've won by saying that they didn't play well or they could have been better or what have you. So with that in mind, if Keith is asking, well, how come you guys didn't play well, or they were up 26, there was definitely times and opportunities for them to put the game away where they didn't. And so I see both sides of it. And I definitely, one of Doc's perspectives was, you didn't play the game enough, or you didn't, talking to Keith saying, you haven't been in enough of these situations to know that, a win is cherished no matter what. And I feel like that was a little out of line, because you don't have to have played the game to understand that. But, at the same time, yeah, they were on the road. They were missing key players and they got the victory. So I think that the question was completely valid. I applaud Keith for standing up for himself, because there are those moments where you're like, well, maybe if I just, pipe down, we can get past this, because all of a sudden, he's riled up and I'm in the middle of this. And I just really want to get an answer to my question. I don't want really him to, like, he insulted Keith, but I don't think he was trying to insult him to, like, put him in his place. It just really was, like I said, emotions caught up in the moment, I think. But yeah, I can see both sides of it, but I feel like Keith's question was completely valid. Doc can react however he reacts. He seemed a little bit, perturbed, and I think that was kind of small of him to phrase it that way, that it was a dumbass question, because it wasn't really that dumb. It just was really indicative of how the team has played and opportunities and the nuances. So it's difficult. It was entertaining to watch. It's difficult to see, Keith bear the brunt of that. But man, when I was watching the post game show, Noah, and they came back on the set, and Michael Barkham just quoted Doc Rivers with the dumbass question line. Man, that was so funny. But hey, man, they won, and that's all that matters, right? So you win, survive, and advance.
I guess Doc Rivers would agree, but no, definitely agree with your point that the ad hominem sort of stuff is out of line. Like, you hope you can stick to kind of the substance and not make it about he didn't play basketball at a high enough level or whatever. Like that's obviously not relevant, or even if one feels that way, it's not something that's really appropriate to express.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. Right.
Yeah. So it's a tough situation.
Hey, man, I don't know if you've ever been in that situation. I have, and I was, super wet behind the ears. And I might have told you this before, or told somebody else, but or mentioned on the podcast. But I was in college, and it was the Allen Iverson era, and at that time, the coach would speak, and then they would open up the locker room, and particularly when Iverson would speak, he would be the last person to speak. He would take a shower, he would get dressed, he would do all that stuff, put his jewelry on, and then, the scrum around his locker would happen. And I was in college reporting for the school radio station, and, there are all these professionals there who need Iverson's quotes to be a part of their story, which is, obviously typical. And, there is often a lull in the time where the people are open to ask questions, and before someone actually asks a question. So maybe there's like a little dead period right there from when the PR person opens it up. Nobody jumps right in with a question. So me being, the ambitious, young, intrepid reporter, I was at the coaches press conference. Larry Brown said that he felt like the team started slow and that they could do a better job of that, and that, Allen kind of is the catalyst for that. So I took that question and asked that to Iverson, and he was upset and was like, "Who said that? Coach said that? I'm not doing a good enough job." And he's like looking me in my face and like staring me down. But then like Phil Jasner jumped in, was like, well, what he was trying to say was like cleaned it all up. So like the temperature like came like way down at that moment. But just being in that situation, face to face, bearing the brunt of that is not always a comfortable place. So I applaud Keith for being the professional and really clarifying and following up and asking the questions even after Doc Rivers was trying to berate him a bit.
Definitely, and I think that's a great story too. That illustrates, like, you hope that being around a team for a while, you gain a sense of how to frame questions to certain type of people, but you don't always nail it in a way where you ask the question such that it doesn't tick them off a little bit. And if it does tick them off a little bit, that's not the worst thing in the world, as long as you hopefully get a response to what you're curious about in your mission of trying to cover the team is the way I look at it. So obviously that's the ultimate goal here. The ultimate goal was not to become a big part of the story and become this topic that everyone's talking about. Like I think the substance of it is worth discussing. And I think also too, Doc Rivers, I guess, tried to make this insinuation that when the Sixers were the more shorthanded team, that no one was talking about how they were putting up a good fight. I just think that's false. I know that I wrote a bunch of stories where it was like, moral victories don't count, but if there was one, that the Sixers got yet another one. Tyrese Maxey played great. They put up a great fight despite, losing to a team that had more healthy bodies, et cetera, et cetera. So I just didn't think that characterization was accurate or fair. And I also don't think it's the job of a head coach or the players to make an assessment on the quality of coverage, unless something is, blatantly false or blatantly out of line. But if it's like, are we getting enough credit in these situations and not enough credit in these? To me, that's splitting hairs and also just not the place of that particular person. I think all you can ask for as someone who's being written about is like the fairness and accuracy is the bottom line. And again, like the overarching aim of asking questions in the first place is to do that job better and to have a more full perspective. And also here, just, to get a little more insight, hopefully, into what's going on with these games where, the Sixers are facing shorthanded teams and the outcome is close. So, to me, that side of it, I think, Keith, the reporter, is going about it in the right way. And again, it's super unfortunate to me that it's something where it does make sense for us to talk a lot about it, because it seems like everyone was talking about it last night. And as you said, they were riffing about it on the post-game show and everything. Again, it's like, it's not what you're aiming for as a reporter, but I guess occasionally you do become part of the story.
Yeah, you could easily link, the Sixers' slow starts to them playing down to their competition. Like there's definitely meat there to discuss, and unfortunate it had to go that way. But hey, we got 2 games left. Well, 1 game left in this year with Thursday against Brooklyn. There will be 2 games before our next podcast. We will rejoin you on Tuesday, January 4th, as they play Houston at the Wells Fargo Center on Monday, January 3rd. And then Wednesday, January 5th against Orlando. So that Tuesday will be our next podcast. And hey, make sure you check out NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. Noah Levick has a few articles up there, including some observations from last night's game you guys should check out. And hey, the glass is half full at the moment. They are not in the playing game or any of that. So we'll just continue to keep pushing forward as this halfway point creeps up on us. Almost 41 games through this season. So interesting to say the least, as all that's happened. Everyone be healthy and safe out there. For Steve Graham and Noah Levick, I'm Danny Pommells. Thanks for listening to the Sixers Talk podcast. We're brought to you by Wilmington University. We'll see you next time.